Inviting eminent panelists, Dr. Sanjay Srivastava, Chief of DRR, UNESCAP, Bangkok, Thailand. Inviting Sri Kamal Satyarthi, he would be joining us in a while, he's on the way. Inviting and joined us on the virtual mode is Mr. Sani Ramos Jegilos. He is the Senior Advisor, Disaster Risk Reduction and Recovery Team Leader, Climate and Disaster Team, Asia Pacific, UNDP, Bangkok region.
Of
Warm
India
welcome to you, sir.
towards
Are
100
you there
years
with
from
us
its
on the virtual
independence.
mode?
Importance of disaster risk, climate change,
Thank you. Warm welcome to
biodiversity
you,
loss
I would like
has
to
been
invite Sri
increasing.
Shashikant Chopre. He's Senior Researcher, ISET, USA, and Sri Vikram Mahajan, CEO, Sphere India. Warm welcome to both our eminent panelists. And I also invite Dr. Rajarshri Dasgupta, Faculty, IIT Delhi. So, ladies and gentlemen, once again, the topic for the session is addressing loss and damage and humanitarian social resilience. And our chair for the session is Sri K.G. Shamparande, and the session will be moderated by Professor Vaji. And the time duration, sir, if you could close in approximately 1 hour. Thank you, sir. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. स्वागत है सबका इस सेशन में. Most welcome after this
landscape, along with other new and emerging risks of digital divide, cybersecurity, etc. Vision 2047 is very important, especially to put forward a futuristic approach. While all of us are thinking of global frameworks until 20.
So we will start with the opening remarks from the chair in the beginning, and then we will go with the panelists. And after that, we will have some question answers if there are any. So maybe, we will have two rounds of interaction by the panelists. First, they'll be presenting their own, whatever they have to say. And then we have kind of question answer, after which they would like to respond. So with this, the session is, the theme of the session is addressing loss and damage. And this COP in Sharm el-Sheikh, everybody was struggling with the outcomes of the COP, and they were worried also till the last moment of the COP. But finally, there is something, some silver lining that came up, and that was the outcome in form of the loss and damage agreement, which was agreed by the parties. With this loss and damage, the COP actually, the news media and the social media also was full of the outcome of the COP in form of the loss and damage kind of understanding which was made. But the missing part was that, mostly it was talked on the finances, the compensation, the subsidies and those kind of things. But the missing part was the mitigation of loss and damages. Less effort, less emphasis was given, especially in the social discourses and the news media, and that was not talked much. So this session, which is the theme of the session, is addressing loss and damages. So we are not talking of the loss and damage, the post-disaster need assessment and those kind of things, but we are talking on the specific issue that why the climate change impact and the damages and the loss, how that can be mitigated, how that can be avoided, what can be the mechanisms, what are the factors which actually restrict those kind of interventions, which is with the whole ecosystem of the loss and damage, that what are the financial or the social or technical or capacity-wise, what are the limitations which restrict us for acting on the mitigation of the loss and damages. So we will request the panelists to focus on those kind of issues which can help us to see the examples and the instances where and how these loss and damages can be avoided, how that can be addressed technically, financially, socially, and those kind of mechanisms. We will have almost 7 to 8 minutes for each panelist, but before we request the learned panelists, I'll request the chair of the session, Shri Shyam Parandeji, for a few words, the opening remarks.
चलो चलो आगे आगे अच्छा थैंक यू Mr. Dr. Sanjay Srivastav ji, and I welcome you all to this session. And though the moderator has set the frame for today's discussion, I'll go a little beyond, because there is some history that I need to share with you. And I started my rehabilitation and relief program post 1977 tidal wave in Andhra. And there was huge loss. And the situation since then, as I observe, had been changing. Like all through the disasters I worked for, there were groups, there were people, there were civil society organizations, NGOs, and everybody around. They came with the loads of relief material, they came with the proposals, and there was no one to guide them. There was no one to organize them, who should go where, what to distribute. And at the end of the day, after the Gujarat earthquake, I saw heaps of water bottles, heaps of clothes, heaps of food staked outside the villages because there was nobody to receive them. And it was a huge, huge loss. It used to be like that. And of course, there were some efforts to control that also during tsunami. Government of Tamil Nadu tried to do that, but then it was impossible because we don't take it otherwise. The civil society organizations have our own ways, and we say, no, we will do like we want. And that's where the catch was. And we were the losers, as a matter of fact, as I look back. And I really appreciate the efforts of NIDM in bringing us all together, because this is the need of the hour. And since last couple of years, what we see, the situation is totally changed. The warnings are there. Earlier, the warnings were there, but there were no communication down to the ground level or grassroots level. So the losses used to be huge. There was no mechanism to mobilize, and there were no NDRF or such forces to reach out to those areas and save people. So it was like that it started. And right now, we see the climate change is taking the toll like nowhere else. I like to talk about Joshimath a little, a couple of sentences, because Joshimath is on all our minds. How it's thinking. It has happened earlier also. It did not make news. And we lived with those losses. In Joshimath, Seva International is serving the people over there. They are already served 690 families. So it's over there like that. Seva International, as a matter of fact, just a minute on that, is a global forum. And Seva International indulges with Indian diaspora, which is called the most vibrant diaspora world over. Motivates them because every diaspora person feels for India, and whatever that might
agenda
be, they might be 100
and
years like
LIAFE life as the overarching strategy. I'm confident that India will lead the DRR agenda globally to make risk reduction as a part of our daily lifestyle. I very much look forward to the outputs of the event and wishing the event a grand success.
serving
Thank you
instrumentally
and
and
namaskar.
successfully. Like in Louisiana, New Orleans, it was sunk. We were there, our volunteers, and I could meet the governor of the state, Louisiana. During the Houston deluge, Seva International was very much there. It is one of the top 10 organizations over there in the state of Texas. During the COVID, Indian diaspora came together, served the people all over the world. It's not only Seva International organized them, and they served together and did a marvelous job world over. During the recent Russia-Ukraine war, we were there doing the serving, helping 4,000 students get back to India. And when the Nigerian ambassador saw the volunteers, he said, "Cannot you help the Africans?" And we did that. 1,100 students from Ukraine, African students, were safely sent back to 5 African countries. So this happened with most of the volunteers in force. They were the savers. So all these efforts outside India were carried out by the diaspora. And that's the strength of the diaspora. Diaspora is known for being the CEOs, being the prime ministers. There are a couple of prime ministers and MPs. 350 MPs are there across the world. Diaspora is all over. The success is there unless and until we change that image alone. The diaspora will be in trouble in course of time. That happened in Fiji, what happened in Uganda will happen again. They should serve, earn money, be successful, and serve local societies. So that's where we work. But then coming to today's session, where we are talking about the climate change and how can we save people, and what measures we should all get into. And that's where I feel that there are so many areas that we can manage SDG goals, and the last one, of course, is partnerships. And here we are today talking about the partnerships. So with that initial comments, I'll open the session, and thank you very much, session coordinator. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for sharing your experiences, especially on the need of the responsive diaspora, especially the role of the community in terms of responses and the whole setup actually which is required at that level. So with this, we will start the session with the panelists. And I'll request, first of all, Mr. Sonny Ramos Jagilos, Senior Advisor, Disaster Risk Reduction and Recovery, the Team Leader, Climate and Disaster Team, Asia Pacific, from UNDP Bangkok, the regional hub. He is joining us online. So are you there, Mr. Ramos?
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for inviting me and UNDP in this very important process of developing a vision for the next 25 years, up to 24/7. Indeed, such a foresighting exercise for building resilience and sustainability is crucial to address the development challenges we are all facing now, this year, next year, in the next 5 years, in the next 10 years, and even the next 25 or 50 years. So my contribution is a couple of thoughts about how UNDP can advance our existing engagement with the stakeholders of India in this very important and priority topic of averting, minimizing, and addressing climate loss and damage. It is a top priority now, but actually before the COP27, it was not even in the agenda. The COP27, it was not even in the agenda. So we must certainly give acknowledgement to civil society organizations, developing countries, particularly the small island development states, in bringing this loss and damage agenda to become a third pillar along with mitigation adaptation in the global policy processes. I will not repeat the details because the media has covered this very well, but there are two significant results coming from the COP27. One, as Professor Wazira said, is the creation of a fund, a loss and damage mechanism. financing mechanism, which is something to be discussed leading to the next COP28. So we don't know a lot of details. But the other thing that's more relevant to this discussion is what we could do now, which is building capability in averting, minimizing, and addressing loss and damage, which is an important topic with what is called the Santiago Network on Loss and Damage, which is a group of developing countries and developed countries with, with an objective of catalyzing technical assistance to vulnerable developing countries through networking, through knowledge sharing. And, and that, in fact, this Santiago Network is an important venue for South-South cooperation and knowledge sharing to institutionalize the capacity building for many countries. As some of you have said, a lot needs to be done. Now, how is UNDP responding then and in the future, and why is this relevant for us? You know, there's a consensus stated already in the IPCC working group, 2021 and 2022. Just very recently, while headlines was about COVID, the IPCC working group 6, certainly without any doubt or very limited doubt that human-induced climate change, including more frequent and intense extreme events, has caused more severe disasters and resulted to widespread adverse impact and related loss and damage to nature and people beyond what we are already experiencing, which is the national climate vulnerability. And for UNDP, this then threatens SDG achievement, this threatens gains in poverty eradication, this, more importantly, the role of inequality has been highlighted. The most vulnerable countries and the poorer countries are not able to cope with the disaster loss and damage. And the problem, unlike with disasters that we have experienced in the past, the problem will continue to get worse. You know, it's not just one event can happen and then we worry about the next one. In fact, with climate change, we know that in the near future, we are reaching global warming on average of 1.5 degrees Celsius. Unfortunately, when I was reading the news, online news from the Guardian today, announcement was made about the onset of El Nino in 2023, which will probably feel in 2024, will probably will result to more unprecedented heat waves. So, you know, the seasonal variability and global warming might bring us to 1.5 degrees Celsius average earlier than what we expect to do. And based on current policies on mitigation, it is inevitable that by the end of century, we will reach the average global warming of 2.8 degrees Celsius. But despite of slow progress overall in global policy process, there's a lot of things going on outside of the COP20, of the COP process. And this group is one of those who are already working on it. So for UNDP, what would be? The first one is that clearly, whether it's disaster or climate change loss and damage, the issue actually is unsustainable development practices. Therefore, SDG becomes more relevant than ever. It will require consolidated efforts, therefore, an integrated response to accelerate climate action and support achievement of SDGs. Regrettably, with COVID, with the Ukraine war, inflation happening, and the climate change, it doesn't look like we are achieving most of the SDGs. So for UNDP, our engagement with you, with the stakeholders, is to come up with a portfolio approach that can bring together capabilities in risk-informed development, climate mitigation, adaptation, disaster risk reduction, and recovery. It should be a package deal rather than taken in isolation. But also, I would repeat that without substantial climate mitigation efforts or reducing greenhouse gases, these program elements will have limited successes. And I agree with you. I sympathize with the observation that, unfortunately, in the COP27, mitigation and reduction of greenhouse gases has not been given a lot of attention. So what can we do, and what already we're undertaking? The first one is to minimize. The second one is minimizing loss and damage through climate adaptation. It's regrettable that the internal adaptation finance flows are still 5 to 10 times below estimated needs, and the gap is widening. Nevertheless, for UNDP, we're very pleased to be engaging with governments and communities in helping develop adaptive capacities and contribute to adaptation actions such as promoting climate resilient livelihoods, fostering food security and resilient value chains, securing access to water and ecosystem services, and provide climate risk information and early warning to protect against the risk of climate change. Our knowledge portal are open. You know, with other UN agencies, we are promoting solutions that work. And in all of these adaptation efforts, important to address those who are left behind, the vulnerable groups. We also carrying out support through national action planning, national adaptation planning process, and this process has been directly linked with countries' national determined contribution and so forth and so on. The third one, which is very relevant to and familiar with all of those who are attending here, is minimizing and addressing loss and damage through disaster risk reduction and recovery. Notable examples of what we could do is improve climate risk assessment, better analysis of and predicting loss and damage of the future, particularly for resilient infrastructure, early warning system, preparedness, addressing displacement, health, urban, and other geographic focus resiliency building. Now we're very pleased to work with you on reframe risk-informed development, which is encompassing what was said in the Paris Agreement, integration of mitigation, adaptation into development planning processes, including, of course, integrating it with ongoing poverty eradication, inequality. And of course, in resilient recovery, we're already working with the government of India around two pillars, vis-a-vis recovery preparedness and enhancing post-disaster assessment and recovery programming. The final point I wish to make is something that experts in this forum might want to collaborate more with us, with UNDP, in better accounting of loss and damage. You know, which means, you know, it's important that countries and communities are able to correctly measure and predict both adaptation costs and climate attributable loss and damage. It's very challenging because, you know, you're not just talking about PDNA vis-a-vis sectors, but actually you're also talking about economic losses, but also non-economic losses. So taxonomy is something that, you know, many in the disaster sector are already working on. With PDNA, we can build upon that. With the Sendai framework, there are very good taxonomy. But nevertheless, addressing the weaknesses of current accounting of loss and damage is imperative so that, you know, communities and countries are able to quantify, predict loss and damage that are attributable to climate change. Now, UNDP is already pursuing further maximization of digital technology, and digital transformation is an opportunity for enhancing this capacity. So the possibility of modeling climate loss and damage is apparent through a data ecosystem approach, the increased use of geospatial information for programming, and of course, improved data governance that will allow data sharing. It can happen at the country level, at the state level, nationally and regionally and globally. So together we can work on those 5 things that I mentioned. I look forward to further discussion on this matter. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Jagalos. And you have touched some of the very important points, like what are the enabling factors for avoiding loss and damages, like data or information or knowledge sharing and so on, a number of factors actually which you have mentioned. Something on the risk-informed development, also the synergy of development and resilience is something which you are talking on, which is very important to have kind of holistic thinking on the resilience building process, especially the resilient livelihoods. And the third point actually, which I could hear prominently, was also on the whole issue of assessing not only economic damages, but also non-economic damages, which is very important, the whole issue of social and other aspects which you have touched upon. So we will be coming back to you for some more questions, Mr. Jagalos. And with this, we request the next panelist, Dr. Sanjay Srivastava, who is again from Bangkok, physically present here, the Chief of Disaster Risk Reduction in UN Economic and Social Council for Asia Pacific from Bangkok. Dr. Sanjay Srivastava.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have 5 minutes to 6 minutes? 7 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, colleagues, and thank you for the organizer, especially Professor Anil Gupta. He asked me to share our thoughts on 3 important points. One, India 2047. What should happen to address loss and damage issues by 2047? and then how science and technology can play that enabling role. Can India establish its leadership in loss and damage days to come by 2047? I think that's a vision for the country in 100 years from the independence, how much capacity the country acquires to address this important issue. Coming to this, loss and damage, if you talk to an economist, he will talk a different language. A climate scientist, different language. Insurance company, they will talk very differently. Then where the truth of loss and damage lies, one point my colleague Sunny highlighted was there are also non-economic cost, loss and damage, how to account for. I don't want to go to what happened in COP27. It was a breakthrough agreement, how it is going to shape to define the whole modalities of loss and damage. But if you look at from today's context in India, how loss and damage is done by different practitioners, and what NIDM can take it forward from its research network, from its university network. They are organizing the fellowship 100 plus, what NIDM can do in this debate. So let me tell you from disaster risk reduction perspective, NIDM has enough maturity of post-disaster needs assessment, PDNA, DALA. You have done it many times. You have taken this to the state levels. There are many things which NIDM has to be appreciated, applauded for. Insurance company, the catastrophic insurance, this is a private sector domain moving in its own direction. Then econometrics model using damage as an input function. And then climate scientists to see the multidisciplinary domain of assessing loss and damage. Can NIDM create this multidisciplinary interface to address all the dimensions of loss and damage? Let me come back to what we did in UNESCAP as a Regional Economic Commission of United Nations. This is the area which has been part of our core mandate. We use, for example, the probabilistic risk assessment, which is a tool used extensively by economists. Global Assessment Report 2015, 2017 were all anchored on what is called annualized average loss. Economists are very familiar with the terms. So for the first time, world could know what is the annualized average loss, direct, indirect, from the disasters. Before that, it was bit and pieces, somewhere, some PDNA, but how much world loses because of the disaster? I think Global Assessment Report 2015, extensive risk intensivity, was a path-breaking initiative. We used in UNESCAP probabilistic risk assessment and identified the loss in India from floods, drought, all disasters together, including tsunami, the earthquake put together. And we published this in Asia Pacific Disaster Report. It's a flagship UN publications. And we found out that 93 billion was annualized average loss from all disasters, direct, indirect in India, which is 3.3% of India's GDP. So if you want to talk loss and damage from an economics lens, so this was the loss and damage. And this is not a quantum mechanics. It cannot be a precise at a nuclear science level, but this is an approximate probabilistic estimate of loss and damage to India. Now we took this hat of economist and came to the climate science hat. The climate science hat was IPCC provided with every increase in temperature, what could be its economic implications. So we converted this, the climate scenarios in terms of the economic loss. And 2021, Asia Pacific Disaster Report, we graduated our loss and damage assessment from the pure econometrics annualized average loss to climate related probability, the scenario based analysis. India with what is called representative concentration pathway, now it is graduated to shared socioeconomic pathway. With RCP 4.5, India's loss from the climate probabilistic model together is close to $132 billion, which is 4.7% of the country's GDP. But when you take it little extreme side of 8.5 representative concentration pathway, it goes to $224 billion, which is 8.84% of the country's GDP. You know, to be very frank with you, these numbers may not help to get international assistance to a country of 3 trillion economy like India, but it certainly helps our policy makers to understand the extent of the damage and loss to the economy because of the natural disaster. So it basically shapes, it guides the policy agenda for adaptation and resilience in days to come. So, for example, if I take this loss and damage in India context to the policy side, how much policy means, to what extent these losses can be minimized? Just take the climate risk profile, develop an adaptation cost, and India, for example, in worst climate case scenario, needs $43 billion to adapt to the worst of the climate scenario. So $1 billion investment in adaptation is 5.5, means close to $7 saving due to annualized average losses. So that's a very easy task. Yesterday, I was quite impressed by some of the civil servants from Uttar Pradesh. They said India doesn't have much dearth of money. It has a budgetary allocation. And it was really what we found from our analytics sitting in Bangkok was India Manrega, for example. It has a budget of $13 billion. 65% of it goes to natural resource management, basically water and soil conservation, all related practices you know very well. So what you need is $43 billion, out of which $13 billion directly comes from Manrega. Then you take the PM Gati Shakti, it's in terms of the $1 trillion, add resilient component into it. So India adaptation gap in terms of money is not much. I fully agree what was told yesterday, Additional Chief Secretary of Uttar Pradesh. We don't have huge adaptation gap as far as budgetary resources is concerned. But then where the gap lies, from damage and assessment to your policy paradigms to implementation. And this is where I yesterday enjoyed the discussion of WRI, Dr. Pai analysis. We must build on technology, but we should not forget science. Because the real game changer for a resilient world is science, technologies together. Let me highlight the science part, which I think Professor Akhilesh Gupta in the first day told. There should be a research group on attribution science. This is a very promising part of the climate science. Those who are climate scientists, they understand it. Any loss and damage discussions will depend on the professional maturity of attribution science. Take, for example, Pakistan flood this year. It made a lot of impact worldwide. One reason of the impact was, of course, it was a huge flooding. You all know 30 million people were impacted. But the more important thing, there was an attribution study by the international scientific community. And it was very clearly established the floods in Pakistan was due to the climate change. So this kind of attribution study is the need of the hour, and I expect in days to come, NIDM will take necessary steps to bring attribution science into loss and damage agenda of the country. Another point which yesterday was discussed was technology, on technology. You have leadership in cloud computing, big data, recent time Prime Minister, drone industry, culture of drone startup, and then geospatial policy just launched, all put together brings India in a very, very commanding position to use science and technology and capitalize on loss and damage for building a resilient country. My last half a minute, two key points which I would like to share as a part of my recommendation. One is the recommendation to NIDM. Please focus on science, attribution science particularly. Along with the econometrics, you have enough expertise in DALA, damage and loss assessment, PDNA. Bring attribution as a part of it. And geospatial, which India has been one of the leading country with constellation of Earth observation satellites. These are all going into private domain. It will be available on risk analytics. So put together will give you a cutting edge to, especially for India's to take loss and damage agenda forward. And finally, the digital. The digital as a vision of the country, India becoming like a lead country in the digital transformation. Why not bring digital transformation, loss and damage? So thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Sanjay. And you have raised some of the very important issues like transformation from a kind of conventional loss and damage thinking and approach to kind of multidisciplinarity, which you have emphasized on. So I mean, that covers the avoiding of loss and damages also, which you touched upon. Looking at Agenda 2047, the expectation from NIDM in terms of attribution science or in terms of guiding the processes related to the holistic L&D process, that those are some of the things actually which is expected from NIDM. And the third point which you have also expressed is how to make the resources resilient, like resources like Manrega. Actually, if that is used in a risk-informed manner, that can contribute a lot for the adaptation and mitigation. But at the same time, if not done in a proper manner, it can also cause problems. I mean, we have seen the issues of waterlogging and those kind of things, which is done because the risk-informed mechanism was not covered there. So those are the things actually, and you also talked on the dividends that adaptation pays and how we can also optimize the resource utilization in terms of the loss and damages. So thank you so much, and we will come back to you for more questions. With this, we have with us Shri Kunal Satyarthi ji, who is Joint Secretary Policy Planning in National Disaster Management Authority. And he has been a very active officer, but we know him, his role in developing a policy for the displacement because of the people who are displaced because of the river and coastal erosion, which he has played a very vital role in developing those kind of policies. So I'll request Shri Kunal Satyarthi ji to give his comments.
Thank you, Chair. And thanks to all the co-panelists. Thanks to the organizers for giving this opportunity to share my thoughts on loss and damage. So I'm sorry for coming late. As always, you get stuck in something in the government offices, and so I'm extremely sorry to the organizers for coming late at the onset. But I'll just like to add my thoughts more from the more from when I was listening to the earlier speaker. I was thinking about my days in Sharm el-Sheikh for 13 days and nights of negotiations on loss and damage. So I'll share from that perspective, because I don't know whether that perspective has been shared or not. So as you're aware, I think it's a very complex world. The three words in the Article 8 of the Paris Agreement drives the whole process in the UNFCCC process. I'm aware people are here well versed with the UNDRR perspective. It doesn't mean that people have not seen UNFCCC. But since Glasgow to Bonn and to Sharm el-Sheikh, the journey has been extremely difficult, and that is what I'd like to share with you. So you are aware that now the UNFCCC has created a new loss and damage finance funding arrangement, and a fund also. And every word was extremely difficult to go through. I'll just share the thoughts on what were the main concerns on loss and damage. So if you look at the journey of loss and damage in the UNFCCC process, it started in 2013 with the island nations and SIDS and AOCs putting forward the agenda of we are drowning, and you're talking about climate change attribution studies. Our sea level is rising, we're already going, our land is going, and you're still trying to figure out whether the science is clear or not clear. And the IPCC report helped us get through. So since 2007 onwards till 2015, 15 is when the Paris Agreement was signed. And in the Paris Agreement, Article 8 very clearly says that there would be emphasis of the climate change domain also on 3 words of averting, minimizing, and addressing loss and damage. So those are the 3 clear words written in the Paris Agreement. But the para 54, if I remember correctly, says that this article would be without any liability of and compensation. So you will not be liable to be compensated if you are going through loss and damage. So all the carbon in the atmosphere would cause extreme weather events, it will cause disasters, it will cause loss and damage. But since attribution science is not clear, and even if it is clear, it would be protected by para 52 or 54, saying there would not be any liability and compensation clause. So that is what the Paris Agreement talks about. But since Glasgow, things have moved ahead, and the Sharm el-Sheikh 13 days were quite engrossing from 5 perspectives. I'll just name them because of the importance of this whole scenario, how it is developing right now also. Today also we had a meeting of the Transitional Committee. So first perspective was that if you heard about this negotiations, it talks about common but differentiated responsibilities, CBDR, RC, as per your own capacities, as per respective capacities. So that was the benchmark of negotiation, right? So the Paris Agreement particularly talks about loss and damage, but not the UNFCCC process. The convention doesn't know about loss and damage, having been signed in '94, is not aware about the phenomena called loss and damage. It talks about climate change, it talks about everything, adaptation, but doesn't talk about loss and damage. So borrowing that word of common but differentiated responsibility as per respective capabilities was a very tricky thing to negotiate through. First sticking point was this. The second was the rate of current emissions via cumulative emissions via historical emissions. So that is a very important journey that we traversed because the onus was that countries which are capable of contributing, meaning India and China and others, should also start contributing to the loss and damage financing funding arrangement rather than getting anything out of that. So the second was on current emissions, historical emissions, and the cumulative emissions. Now, the third was, if you go back and read the paragraph 1, which was crafted very well and uses the word recovery and reconstruction very substantially. So if you look at the loss and damage funding arrangement decision of Sharm el-Sheikh, COP27, it does say that we are now acknowledging that climate change causes loss and damage. So the attribution study is fine. So I think world over, the UNFCCC has acknowledged this phenomena for the first time. So paragraph 1 is very clear and also elaborates, borrowing from the DRR family, the words economic and non-economic losses. It also borrows the word extreme weather event and slow onset event. So very important 6 words in first paragraph of the funding arrangement decision is very, very substantial movement in the climate change domain, bringing DRR and DM together with climate change. Adaptation, I'll talk about separately if time permits or stuff. So that is very important to understand. Para 2 talks about creating a funding arrangement. The idea was to create this funding arrangement in COP27 within the UNFCCC process, not take it outside. It could be a great funnel which takes care of all the funding that comes to recovery and reconstruction, addressing loss and damage, but the fund flow happens through the UNFCCC process. Now, the third important thing was whether it would be a grant or a loan or an insurance. I'm just speaking extempo from my thoughts. So, third tricky point was, would this fund be grant? And would it be a loan? Or you will play into the tricky world of insurance. Also, that's an important word. I'm not going to details of the merits or demerits of insurance, but that was the third tricky point to negotiate. So currently, leaves it open. It acknowledges there's a funnel in which you can pour funds. It will pour through that and go into various countries affected by, which are suffering from loss and damage. For that, the transitional committee has been set up. It is still being structured. It will have the first meeting soon. So all these 7 groups are filing their nominations. This transitional committee will meet twice or thrice, and before COP28, give us the magic formula of how this fund will flow. We are watching it very closely. Today also we had a meeting of the body that is to be constituted. So that is one. The third is it allows international funding to flow into this phenomena right now. And the normal distinction, borrowing from the theme of this session and the theme of the conference that is happening. I think it is very important to acknowledge, and this distinction we have to hammer through, that humanitarian aid or response and relief is not addressing loss and damage. Loss and damage is beyond that. So the three words we have to play very tricky. Averting is, the time to avert is almost gone. You can avert with better capacities, better preparedness. So that is about averting. Mitigating is more about, minimizing is more about mitigating. So we must have mitigation plans. We are now talking about the third word, which is addressing loss and damage. The time for averting and minimizing is long past, and we should move towards the word of addressing loss and damage. So that is about the international perspective. At the national level, I would like to apprise that NIDM has developed a beautiful proforma on capturing post-disaster need assessment. We are trying that for the first time. NDM and NIDM together are trying that for the first time in the country. We have already, I have seen all the 8 reports. In the floods during this year, we have done PDNA in 8 states. So that's the first movement towards capturing post-disaster needs assessment. 9 states in the country have attempted or tried to do loss and damage, but basically for economic losses, not currently for non-economic losses, not even for losses currently we are doing for damages. So we are capturing only damages now. Losses are the process flow that will happen. So this is a good time. I think midterm review is lined up next year. The next year, not next year, this November would be the birth of the funding arrangement. It will start taking shape at the COP28. We have the PDNA happening in the country. The Finance Commission provides for Recovery and Reconstruction Fund. So I think if all the 4 directions that the current trajectory, the international and national phenomena is taking, if we follow that, we are quite happily moving with a lot of substance in this direction of addressing loss and damage. So that's all from my side. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Satyarthi ji, and thanks for sharing those 13 days of Sharm el-Sheikh. And you also shared the para and the lines, and also between the lines what the agreement says. And I'm sure there may be some questions on, who will try to understand it more in a more from a person actually who was not only involved, but also he was part of the process of developing the agreement. So thank you so much. And with this, I request the next panelist, Mr. Shashikant Chopde, who is the senior researcher ISET, and also with him is joining Shri Vikrant Mahajanji, who is the CEO of Sphere India. But this, I am told that it will be started by Shri Vikrant Mahajanji, which will be followed by Shashikant Chopde ji. So, Mr. Mahajan.
Thank you, Chair and the moderator. I think the question we begin this session was with that, how do we look at addressing the loss and damages? And this is a question certainly I'm also pondering around. The next session also, which I'm moderating on mainstreaming DRR and climate change, I think I always thought that's one of the ways, and that's where probably the beginning happens. But I think to begin with, let's look at some of data which is coming from some research that in between 2005 and 2015, Mumbai lost 14,000 crores due to floods. And it is anticipated again through another research by IPCC that the flood losses will increase 166 times, 2050. And when we're visioning 2047, I think that's kind of a thing we need to vision. What is the change which we are going to see, because climate change is going to be there. I think the discussion has gone beyond of preventing it at 1.5 degrees now. I think we have accepted that, here, and we're moving ahead now to see that. So this change is going to be there, and there are going to be losses. So how much the incremental loss is going to be there, and how we're going to address that. I think some very good discussions and very good situations have come up from the panelists, including the new provisions of finances. We hear from Kailash-ji, loss and damage finance, the big achievement at COP27. What I started seeing is, this community which we are talking today also. I think we're talking, the same set of actors is essentially a humanitarian risk resilience community we keep engaging with here, and maybe sometime the climate change one. with these discourses. And maybe the solution is not here. Maybe entire thinking, ideology, and policy thinking is coming here. But I think a lot of application is with the development community. I think that's where perhaps which we are leaving behind. Most of the time is not part of this discussion and discourse. These challenges are going to be addressed by development actors, and we need to bring more development actors into this discussion and understanding into it. And I'm coming up with this with my more reinforced sense that in one of the previous discussions, like a forum like this, when we were sitting and discussing, we are looking for new finances definitely, but a lot of our development actors are not aware of the financing which is available within their funds for addressing damage and losses, also as well as coming from mainstreaming DRR and climate change in their work. For example, their provision of 10 to 25% in all development works. That financing has exist in the country, but how much of that have been utilized so far? How much of a reporting on it has happened so far? Do we have a report anywhere that this much percentage of funding which was earmarked for mainstreaming DRR and climate change have been utilized? So I think the financial provisions are there. Why it's not happening? I see one main reason is a lack of awareness across development actors and bringing all of them together. So I think one way of starting it always is we increase more awareness and we start bringing humanitarian development, DRR, climate change, all of them together as a one nexus. I think that's a nexus approach which is being proposed coming from the previous World Humanitarian Summit and also in the Sendai framework. That's the kind of approach has been suggested. So that could be one of the solutions. And then second is it requires we are discussing at awareness level, it requires a lot of a capacity building at the very, very field and operational level. I think yesterday I heard the ED and IDM that while all these conferences and others, we have a discussions going on at a policy level, but it is the people at the field level where he feels that he has been all this his service, how much they know about it, how much capacity they have when we have to put these things into action. Hearing the moderator, also Dr. Shiraz, when he's saying that in NREGA, maybe we are doing certain works which NREGA may have a provision of a mainstreaming DRR in it also because of the same the funding provision, but it may be leading to enhanced risk because it may be leading to more water catchment because of the construction which is happening under NREGA or under the project under these development schemes. So it is the capacity building of their frontline workers, frontline team at GPDP level, how we are mainstreaming it and how we build capacity there, building it there. I think that's perhaps also there is. At the more strategic national level, I think it's the whole damage and loss. Now we need to look at more as a governance as well as accountability issue. I think we need to create a governance mechanism which look at the whole thing, which the good efforts coming from a PDNA, the data is being assessed and all those things, but damage and loss is happening. But we create a governance for it. Yes, this is damage and losses are there. We understand the root causes of it, how those root causes are going to be addressed, creating an institutional mechanism completely towards that. That's where an accounting happens for that. Financing, maybe I think we heard there new financing coming from COP27 and others at the international level and how it materialized. When it comes to India, I think what we heard from the earliest sessions also, there is adequate finance. There are a lot of financing available in India which is still untapped and unutilized. I think how we look at that. Preventing and risk reduction, I think that's the big area. How to do mainstreaming, I think that in itself is we don't have many success stories, we don't have many role models exactly to say there is. I don't find how to do a mainstreaming of DRR and climate change in development. I think we don't find many examples, even in civil society. That's where in a big broad network I am coordinating. I've been asking our members and other UN partners, can you give some good examples? Can we see some good practices which brings out that this is how the mainstreaming need to happen? I think that's a topic also for the next session which we're discussing it. Maybe we need to encourage that. We need to identify, we need to provide some good practices. We need to provide some role models, institutions which shows. I would like to throw a challenge to a lot of the member organizations for Spray India also. Can some of them come forward and demonstrate that this is how mainstreaming is happening in development work, and then we work with the government to, to scale it up. I think that's perhaps is the evolution which need to happen. And then, coming towards what you're saying is it's not just about the damage loss is not just about the technical part of it. Science and technology, as you're saying, is this the technology part of it, the bylaws, how we implement the bylaws. I think how we see that the future construction comes up with a long-term master planning, and that planning address the very building bylaws and the geography and topography of the situation of the region, so that we don't end up with situations which we're seeing in Joshimath and others. But more than that, it is also social part. I think the social and the social structures we have and the capacities, how we continues to build the capacities of our social infrastructure over there. I think that needed to be looked in along with this. And maybe towards the end, I think more it will come up as a how-to guidance. We need to develop, how-to guidance on these good practices which to be developed, and broad-based it, mainstream it. Toward this thing, Sphere India, which I represent, with the leadership from Dr. Shashi Kant here, and the sport with an ADM, General Bindal is sitting in front of me. I think under his guidance, we started this experiment, to look at a research of the damage and losses, the root causes of damage and losses in Cyclone Chicote and Cyclone Yas. And that's come up with a good report, has come out of that. That report has given some interesting insights and recommendations, and I'll leave this discussion forward with Dr. Shashikant, not only to share what broad recommendation came out from them and other vision forward. Over to you, Dr. Shashikant.
Thank you, Vikrant, and thank you to the organizers for providing me this opportunity. I feel privileged to be part of this. As Vikrant was mentioning, there is a study which we were part of. Dr. Bindal, General Bindal, Anil Gupta, and the Sphere team were involved in the study to understand what has been the loss and damage due to Cyclone Tate and Yas. And it was quite an in-depth study in terms of household level surveys were conducted to understand by doing a sample population survey in the 4 states, West Bengal, Odisha, and on the west coast it was Gujarat and Maharashtra. I will not go into the details of the findings, but essentially there are these 6 broad areas the study came up with as the damage areas, loss and damage areas. First one is agriculture. Agriculture sector was severely impacted. Fields were, sand casted, and crops were destroyed. That's one area that was, looked at. Second area where was the environment, impact on environment, the biodiversity, forests, etc. The third was housing. Housing was a major damage sector we found. Fourth one was the infrastructure, the physical as well as the social infrastructure. And let me actually go into, the ways to address, what could be the possible ways to address these loss and damages, and lives. Yeah, the first and foremost was the lives. We looked at, causative factors of lives also, and I'll come to that towards the end of my talk. Addressing, agriculture, for example, agricultural damages in agriculture. There are proven practices, climate resilient agriculture practices, and but they are all focusing on production, sustaining production, or enhancing production, maintaining production despite the hazards, climate hazards that are going to hit the sector. But for the income to really, the production to lead to income enhancement of farmers, we'll also need to focus on value chain strengthening, both forward and backward. And there are umpteen number of examples where some states have, done for taking a particular, for example, moong dal, chickpea, and produced, strengthened the value chain from end to end, and in the process, the farmers have got enhanced income. So there is a need to promote this idea at large scale in various crops, potential crops. Every state would have, flagship, important crops where these things can be strengthened. In the housing sector, which was one of the major, sector which caused damage, majority of the houses that were damaged were non-engineered. In the earlier session also, we heard the damage caused is all, majorly due to non-engineered houses. Here, I would like to flag, a couple of points towards addressing these damage, loss and damages. One is the material. Though this was looking at cyclones per se, but if you zoom out, and if you look at, hazards posed by climate change, be it heat, be it floods, or the cyclones, or the sea level rise, what it implies as regard addressing, the impacts on housing sector per se, is we need to rethink about the materials we're talking about used in construction. For example, there are thermal insulation material, aerated autoclave concrete blocks, which actually provide wonderful thermal insulation from heat or even from cold, for that sake. And they're lighter. And in case of, I will not dwell into Josiphat case, but they are lighter and they can actually be relatively more safer in those contexts too. So I'm just giving an example of material. We need to think through the entire, spectrum of material that is used for housing sector and how we can actually make it more resilient. Second part is the design part. If you want a building to be flood resilient, its plinth level or the sill level has to be above particular, historical flood, or by considering future projections, whatever the maximum flood level is likely to be observed, it has to be above that. These design norms need to be put in place and implemented on large scale. The houses are non-engineered. If we need to make them engineered and also better engineered, and also promote the material, appropriate material, we can think of promoting enterprises at local level for generating building material. On the lines of, there is this Nirmiti Kendras that were opened in Kerala on, environmental, eco-friendly building construction material, the enterprises. And at the same time, one could think of talking about capacity building of masons, local masons, those masons who actually just construct house in the villages, in the rural areas. So orienting them to designs and creating this enterprise along the lines of, something called Nirmiti Kendras that were done way back in late 80s. I think that sounds a promising example. In addition, what is required is data, needs to be made public, risk data. High-risk zones and moderate risk zones could be mapped in red and orange and made it public. That way, if the information is made public, the prices will dissuade the developers and the insurance companies from people building on those red and orange areas. So it can act as a disincentive, and very effective disincentive. Vikrant talked about zonation. It has to be enforced through master plans. But at the same time, we need also be able to review annually through remote sense imageries how much is the deviation, and what corrective action can be taken. It has to be an independent assessment. I can talk about, there are various options, but not going into details. But I would like to flag 3 points, last 3 points. On the infrastructure, yesterday, Dr. Pardeshi talked about, we don't have shortage of funds. Infrastructure resilience. We don't have shortage of funds. What is required is, the capacity of the state to draw upon those funds, to develop projects that actually have mitigation elements as part of it. So the capacity and proper institutional development needs to happen within SDMAs and also the departments, government, and at the local, at the district level. Tools need to be developed, enabling environment needs to be created, and guidelines and all. One should work on that. And the resilience dimension need to be incorporated in the entire project development cycle, from identification to formulation to approval, the approval process. There was this EFC, performa for approving projects above so and so amount, which actually somewhere, it's lost track of. And I would like to hear what could be, how we could actually take it forward as regard when the project approval process happens. And it has to be looked at, resilience has to be looked at across all phases of disaster management, not just, the mitigation and prevention, but preparedness too. That helps in bouncing back better, bouncing back quicker in the recovery stage. There is, we are actually at it's a very opportune time for India, because much of the urban areas, significant part of the urban area that we'll see in 2030 and beyond is yet to be built. So we need to take this, steps and mainstream them, as Vikrant was saying. It will also help implement SFDRR and achieve SDGs. Finally, on the recommendation part, especially if, what all this implies for Vision 2047, we need to develop a perspective plan by, having actions broken down by short term, medium term, long term, across various categories of, addressing loss and damage. Loss and damage could be just one component of, that perspective plan we are talking about, developing resilience of 2047 in that Amrit Kal. And we also need to think about, finally, we need to think about financing. And I see public-private partnership combined with insurance, where actually there are risk-sharing contractual arrangements between public and private put in place as a very potential opportunity to, infuse resilience in the infrastructure sector. And, sorry, this is my last point. On the lives part, loss of lives, what we did, which could be used, which could be, the assessment could be undertaken after every major disaster by state to understand which are the areas where the emergency support needs to be strengthened to save lives. With this, I'll close. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shashibhai. And as Vikrantji was also mentioning, the whole issue of role of development actors and how in terms of utilizing the development resources for resilience building, and especially the capacity building for the implementers and those who are at the district level, the sub-district level, which is very important. And Shashibhai, as you very rightly said, we also felt that while working with the small and marginal farmers in agriculture, there are only, looking at the aspirations of doubling the income or increasing the income, there are only 3 ways. One is to reduce the input cost, or you have to increase the production, or you have to reduce the losses. So reducing the losses is one of the key components in terms of increasing the net income of the farmers and agriculture you talked on, besides the other sectors. So thank you so much, and we will come back for some questions if there are any. And with this, we request in the last, Dr. Rajarshi Das Gupta, the faculty in IIT Delhi, for his comments and observations.
Thank you very much, Chair. So I'm the last speaker, so I more or less know what to speak, but I do not know how to speak it differently. So a little bit focus on, since we have discussed a lot on economic damages, loss and damages. And I think there is other side, and we have already discussed that there are a lot of non-material or non-economic loss and damages. Since you were talking about cyclone Yash and Amphan, so we did also some work on Sundarban region, and we found that about 50% of our respondents, they are suffering from some kind of PTSD, like the post-traumatic stress disaster. And that ranges from different, psychosocial responses. And therefore, it's very important from our perspective, our policy planning perspective, that we consider mental health and post-disaster human well-being. So that's very, very important. But when we say non-material loss and damages or non-economic damages, that includes a bigger chunk of kind of losses, like loss of cultural heritages, loss of biodiversity, loss of some sacred forests, etc. And here I would like to bridge some knowledge gap, and honestly we do not have a framework to account for those kind of issues. And therefore I think the global research community, they are more interested in quantifying those non-material or non-economic damages. One thing I would like to, I know the time is running out and I see a lot of tea-thirsty faces. So I'll just bring one point, like I have recently worked for both IPCC and IPBS. I'm not sure whether you have heard about IPBS. It stands for Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform for Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. So they have come up with a framework called Nature's Contribution to People Framework. It actually highlights the relational values between human and nature. And we are actually, not me, but some other colleagues also, we are working to downscale this concept, the nature contribution to people. This is a more relational value concept, to understand how this concept can be applied beyond this so-called domain boundary. For example, if a farmer, he loses his agricultural land. So of course this is a direct consequence to his livelihood. But imagine he sees that particular piece of land as his well-being, as well as his sons and generations' well-being. So it's a very prominent fact in India. So loss of agricultural land doesn't only equate to some money or some kind of monetary values, but a security, sense of security, intergenerational sustainability. So we are trying to quantify those things, and we are at a very national stage, I must say. But we have done some preliminary work using some set of our techniques also, like public participatory GIS, trying to quantify at the local level which landscapes providing more emotional values, which is a very important, particularly in India, because we have land conflicts owing to emotional attachment or religious sentiments and all this. So this is not yet what we are doing. Time is running out, but I'll be very happy to discuss this research if you are really interested in it. Thank you so much.
I'm sorry, Dr. Dasgupta, the time is short and you could not complete your thing. But I think you have raised very important point of whole issue of natural ecosystems and the role the natural ecosystem plays in terms of loss and damages. And when that is very important. So we will, without losing any more time, we will have two quick questions from the audience, if there are any. Quick questions. Yes, please.
Thank you so much. Thanks, sir. The panelists, they have emphasized on attribution science for policy formulation. So I just want to throw some light on the extreme rainfall events of recent, the extreme rainfall events in Uttarakhand Himalayas of the recent past, creating havoc in terms of loss of life and damages. Some studies have been done and also already published about the Tehri Dam project. You know, it is a well-known fact that due to global warming, the moisture holding capacity of the atmosphere, it increases. Now we have also provided a source of moisture with a big, huge reservoir, that too in the Himalayan ecosystem. And now we are observing a lot of cloudburst events. So some studies are already there. I mean, we do not say that they are directly attributing, but there is an indication. And through a project, okay, just half a minute, I happen to, interact with the local people. Even the local people, they say that after the Tehri reservoir, the humidity has increased in the atmosphere. So, I mean, what do we do? If we do an attribution study, we may, come out with the fact that it is this reservoir is responsible for this problem. Then how do we undo? So we have actually married a problem. So how do we undo?
Can we have the second question also? If there are, yeah, please.
Thank you, sir. My question is that in the current scenario, we are giving compensation to the farmers on the basis of landholding. So a large farmer will be a bigger amount of landholding and the compensation is more for him. So don't you think that the large and marginal farmers are the worst sufferers and they should be given more importance? So
Thank you. So I'll request the concerned panelists to respond. Sanjay ji first.
Yeah, I think I will touch upon the attribution science. Thank you for the question. You know, attribution science is like evolving. At this stage, it's quite mature. The recent IPCC report, Assessment Report 6, first time they used the word what is called shared socio-economic pathway. It was a representative concentration pathway. So the attribution is embedded in this. So last year, Nobel Prize of Physics was given to the set of the scientists who did a deep dive on climate attribution science. So the study which are basically targeted whether the heavy rain in Uttarakhand is due to the climate change. You have to create a scenario. In the scenario, there are many parameters you have to inject and then then publish it. It is like Lancet of medical science, so attribution science in the climate science. So this is fast evolving, and it was a big breakthrough in IPCC Assessment Report 6. So you will see a lot of application. That is why I was requesting Professor Anil Gupta use NIDM, because NIDM has both DRR, climate scientists together. So that's a good opportunity.
And Satya, would you like to respond to that?
So the attribution science, I'll remain to be silent because we are already in deep trouble because of attribution and all that. So I'll not make any comments here. The other portion, I would like to differ. You should go and look at the relief and response manual. It actually treats people differently. It doesn't treat the same. So you should be downloading the response and relief manual. It actually treats people differently. And it does make account for that if you are a lower landholder, you get more money in compensation. So that's already provided. It has been provided since time immemorial, has been reiterated this year. Thank you.
Thank you. If there are any other quick response, otherwise I'll request the chair to say a few words for the conclusion.
Hello? Right. Thank you, Coordinator. In Himalayan region, post 2013, I'm not going to repeat what they have said, but just making a point from the point of view of the implementation agency. And then we started our long-term rehabilitation in 2 districts where the floods had damaged the whole ecosystem. And they were, of course, the Badrinath and the Kedarnath, Chamoli and the Rudraprayag districts. And we developed a model and where it was based on 4S: synergy, skill, sustainability, and sensibility. And of course, synergy was institutional building and capacity building, and that we did it with the women's groups. And we have now activity in more than 400 villages. They run, these women run an agri-business company, FPO. And then sustainability, we gave them the enterprise development through the company. And of course, sensibility, policy, and advocacy, and awareness generation in the society. So that's how we tried, and we have successfully implemented this, and it's benefiting. And there are, of course, up the hills, the land holdings have reduced so much that unless and until they get into community agriculture, they won't survive, and we did that effectively, and that's how it is a successful project. With that, I thank everybody for being with us and listening to us, and of course the coordinator and the whole panel. It was very eloquent and educating. Thank you very much.
A special thanks to Mr. Jagalos for joining us from Bangkok. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. And I would now like to invite Dr. Kunal Sharma, Assistant Director, Ministry of Labour, to kindly do the honours of presenting a token of gratitude on behalf of the organisers to our distinguished Chair, Shri K.G. Shyam Parande, Secretary, Seva International. May I also request you, sir, to do the honours of presenting a token of gratitude to our session moderator, Professor Shiraz Waji. Thank you very much indeed, sir, for wonderfully moderating this session. Thank you, Dr. Sharma, for doing the honours. I now invite Dr. Anjali Barwal from NIDM to kindly do the honours of presenting a token of gratitude to Dr. Sanjay Srivastava, Chief of DRR, UNESCO Bangkok, Thailand. Thank you, sir, for being here with us today. I would request you to present to Shri Kunal Satyarthi, Joint Secretary Policy Planning, NDMA, Government of India. Thank you very much indeed. And thank you, ma'am. And I would now invite Ms. Atisha Sood from NIDM to present to Shri Shashikant Chopre, to Shri Vikrant Mahajan, and to Dr. Rajashri Das Gupta, Faculty, IIT Delhi. Thank you. May I also invite now on stage Professor Gupta, Dr. Kunal Sharma, Dr. Anjali and Ms. Atisha for a group photograph with our esteemed panel here. And ladies and gentlemen, with that, we will now have a quick short break of 10 minutes only. Tea is served outside. Please help yourselves to a cup of tea and coffee and be back in time. We will be going ahead with the session at 4:10.
Thank you so much.